Part 4. =RK=. Republic Cruiser Concordat. Bothoi. The Force screamed in an unnatural agony and a whole world held with it. Ki-Adi-Mundi thought that when he felt the reverberations of Camino's death, it would be the worst thing he ever experienced. This day proved him wrong. He felt life itself unravel, scream and beg as it was consumed by the dark side itself. He fell on his knees and screamed too, only to be answered with insane laughter. Mundi's eyes snapped open and he saw something twisted stumble down the corridor. Madoran. The former Jedi Master felt like a sore in the Force, a tumor that was simply wrong. "Can you feel it, my friend?" Madoran snarled. "Power. So much power." He cackled madly. The lianas that made up his body twisted and turned, pulsed with dark miasma that made the Jedi recoil from their very proximity. "Sith." Mundi growled. "Everything your kind touches rots," he spat and pulled himself together. He got up on unsteady legs and drew his lightsaber. "You think you can stand against me? Here and now?" Madoran brought his head back and laughed. "My eyes are finally fully opened. You can't comprehend the power of the dark side, Mundi. Today I am invincible. You won't stop me. No one can stop me now." There was hunger and anticipation in Madoran's voice. At that moment, Mundi almost believed him. Vale was dying, that much he could sense, yet in his moment of death, that madman decided to unleash an insanity the galaxy has never seen before. Bothoi was being consumed by the dark side. It was becoming an empty husk, a wood that would stand as monument to the Sith's hubris and crimes. The Jedi Master couldn't ignore what was happening around him. Even as he steeled his resolve, as determination to stand against the night kept a small flame of light in the face of the dark side itself, he couldn't help but feel righteous anger at the crime atrocity he couldn't prevent. It was at that moment that he understood. There was no place for the Sith in the galaxy if anyone was to have a future. The Council was right after all. The Sith had to be vanquished, once and for all. With Vale dying, that only left Dooku and the Fallen in this fleet. No matter if it meant his death, Mundi had to excise this cancer once and for all. Madoran sneered. "You came to end me, didn't you? Come then. Let me show you what you could never comprehend." The fallen Jedi ignited his green lightsaber and charged. A platoon of clones, forgotten until then, opened fire with sonic blasters and flamethrowers. That should have been enough to make Madoran falter. On another day, it would have been. But today, as Bothoi was consumed, Madoran pulsed with dark power and sonic blasts struck him to no visible effect. Liquid fire refused to touch his form and parted as a river as he approached. Mundi got his own lightsaber up and ignited just in time to intercept an incredibly powerful slash that sent him to his knees. The second strike made his muscles shook with the strain of keeping the madman's blade away. The third, it battered his blade away and left him open for a deadly blow. One that never landed. A whole clone squad jumped at Madoran, either wielding their sonic blasters as clubs or drawing vibroblades. One attempted to tackle the fallen Jedi and distracted him long enough for Mundi to roll back. The clone succeeded and died for his troubles when Madoran grabbed him with the Force and slammed him in the ceiling so hard that his armor cracked. Blindingly fast riposte later, 3 more clones lost their shields and got their blasters cut to pieces. A fourth got caught in a telekinetic grip and Madoran used him as a battering ram to clear the surrounding space of soldiers before slamming him into the floor until blood flowed like a river through what was left of his shattered armor. The remaining clones didn't falter. They simply began falling back and kept shooting. One of them paused for a moment to drag Mundi with them. Madoran laughed and charged into the heart of their formation. A whole squad let their sonic blasters fall to the ground and pulled out blades, then jumped at the fallen Jedi just as he reached them. He threw them away with a telekinetic pulse just in time to meet Mundi, who used the brief respite to gather his wits and go on the offensive. They exchanged a flurry of blows and the Jedi had to fall back. Madoran's blows were too fast, they had too much power behind them. The dark side was oppressive, more powerful than even as she fed upon a whole world. It sapped Mundi's strength, weighted him down, slowing his reactions, and it was only his shielded armor that kept him alive when he couldn't parry in time. His shield popped, his armor melted and ablated, clones died around him as he had to fall back again and again. No, Mundi snapped. He couldn't fall here. He couldn't let the Sith win another victory. They must not be allowed to spread their insane ideology any further, no matter the cost. That decision filled him with peace. Mundi planted his feet on the deck and refused to be pushed back. The air itself blazed from the clash of their blades. The Jedi Master threw everything he had at his fallen comrade, yet it simply wasn't enough. Madoran met him blow for blow, and with each exchange, Mundi felt his strength wane while his opponent only grew stronger. It was at that moment when one of the clones the fallen one knocked away earlier tackled him. Madoran managed to slam the man into the floor in the last moment, yet that wasn't before a vibroblade found its way into his left foot. The fallen Jedi screamed in pain, slammed away Mundi's blade and delivered an overpowered slash that finally burned through the Jedi Master's breastplate and seared his chest. While painful, it was far from a lethal blow. Yet, it didn't matter, Mundi was opened and defenseless. All he could do was desperately jump back, and despite his wound, Madoran followed. The Jedi Master gathered as much of the Force as he could and threw it at the approaching adversary. Madoran simply bullied his way through the attack and swung down what should have been a killing blow. Instead, a clone flew by, propelled by a rocket pack, flew right into the fallen Jedi wielding a vibroblade he slammed into his chest before both of them impacted the wall to the left with bone-breaking speed. Madoran screamed and brought his lightsaber down upon the clone. It popped the shield, burned through the armor and cut into the jetpack, igniting the fuel. The following explosion seared the corridor and sent Mundi flying back. He stared at the dead clones, at the smoke and flames blocking his visions, and glared. The Jedi could still feel Madoran. The fallen one stumbled into view, displaying his torn and smoking body. The dark side can't be denied, Madoran hissed in pain. With every painful step his raked flesh twitched and screamed, yet he kept coming. The sound of armored feet slamming into the deck echoed into the corridor. Clones piled up behind Mundi and without wasting time aimed their blasters and opened fire. With his lightsaber destroyed by the earlier explosion, Madoran raised a hand in a desperate bid to stop the incoming firepower. While the fury of the dark side was enough to somehow sustain his body despite the deadly he incurred, this was too much. Some shots did fizzle in midair, swallowed or dissipated by dark side energies. Yet, more than enough slammed into Madoran, blew away large chunks of his flesh, and ignited the rest. The fallen Jedi howled in pain just as the few damned souls still alive on Bothawui before they were consumed too. Then it was finally over. Madoran's burning body crumpled to the floor only to be shot again and again, before an enterprising clone picked up a fallen flamethrower and covered it with burning fuel for a good measure. Mundi collapsed next. Bothawui's dying screams, the strain of this short but vicious combat, and his wounds, they were just too much. RK equals. All across the galaxy, people watched the unexpected broadcast from Bothawui. That world had one of a handful of transmitters large and powerful enough to reach most of explored space despite the pitiful state of the holonet and burn even through a significant amount of jamming to deliver its message. Many were shocked by yet another betrayal. The separatists cheered, they got an ally, and if the deities they believed in were just, then they were about to watch a monster receive its due. In the Republic, the transmission was met with mixed feelings. There were many who decried Vale as a monster. Others saw him as necessary evil, and yet more people hailed him as a hero, savior even. On war-torn Mandalore and thousands of worlds that Mandalorians called home, billions watched their leader make his last stand. He didn't run as the Bothans expected. He didn't betray his warriors in order to save his skin as a Sith should have. Instead, Mandalore stood his ground. He gave his final order, for his fleet to relieve their homeworld, and then the whole galaxy watched in high definition how he burned and healed in front of their eyes only to burn again. They watched through direct sensor feeds how the whole Bothan fleet fall in disarray and simply drifted without firing a shot. Battle stations remained silent. Countless civilian ships tumbled out of control, some crashed, others flew in the darkness of space void of all life, and the rest got caught by Bohao's gravity and splattered themselves upon its planetary shields. They saw the Bothan Council scream, shake and fall apart into flakes of black dust. Dark smoke passed over the surface, and where once stood green forests and crystal blue oceans, only grey ruin remained. All across the galaxy, those attuned to the Force felt the backslash. When it was all over, once not a single living thing remained on Bothoi, only then the doors leading to the Shining Lights observation lounge blew up, showering the dark cold interior with shards of burning metal. Armored clones followed by medics stormed in to find a twisted, burning wreck, all that was left of their general. Medics rushed to the smoking corpse, and that was the last thing the galaxy saw before the Republic fleet jumped into hyperspace. =RK=, Part 5, =RK=, LART transport, en route to Republic R&D Center, Coruscant. Nowadays, whole wings of LARTs, fighters and even bombers patrolling the skies or flying through the large man-made canyons of the city world of Coruscant were a common sight. No one paid any attention to yet another flight of transports. While the Battle of the Senate, as the media dubbed it, proved to be a breaking point for the riots that threw the whole world into chaos, the troubles were by no means over yet. There were still smaller protests and riots all over the place. Groups of rogue clones and criminals reigned in parts of the Undercity, and 3 whole army groups got unleashed upon them to back up the exhausted security forces. As far as anyone was concerned, the transports carrying a battalion of Ahsoka's soldiers was on its way to secure yet another problem spot, or on its back after it did so. Nothing out of the ordinary, no sir. They were most certainly not going to a secret Republic facility where they were to arrest the senior staff for conducting experiments better suited for mimetic Sith than anyone working for the Republic. Ahsoka stared through the open side door of her LART with unseeing eyes. It took all her training, both Jedi and as an officer, to keep her temper in check. She had been incensed ever since Obi-Wan called her with her new orders and explained what was the latest mess she had to clean up. When that particular call happened, Ahsoka's regiment was busy restoring order in a district where 2 of the local gangs went out of their minds and started a small war. It took her hours to wrap things up enough, extract one of her battalions and arrange transportation, time enough for Obi-Wan to push through some important paperwork, which made her visit to the R&D Center official and would help to take the madman there off guard. Tano's target was protected in part by obscurity. No one tried to deny that it was a large research and development facility. After all, there were a lot of those on Coruscant, and almost all of them belonged to various corporations. As far as the public at large knew, this one was no different. On the outside and its upper levels, that was indeed the case. That part was a legit Coruscant Arms research branch. No one would be too surprised to see a place like that, one working very closely with the Republic military, protected by actual GAR soldiers. Of course, most people might have raised an eyebrow or two at the vast, sealed-off complex that took many of the levels below. "We're 2 mics out, ma'am," the pilot announced. "Please fasten your seat belts, put your meals and drinks away and brace for landing." Ahsoka's lips twitched. These kinds of small jokes were something she was unfamiliar with from when she served with the clones. While there was no doubt which group was more professional, there was simply something more fulfilling from working with ordinary people. Tano didn't know if it was the fact that she was officially in charge and had the rank to prove it, or if it was the small things that constantly demonstrated that her people had lives and loved ones outside the military, yet they volunteered anyway. Or because of it. "Inform them that the new chief of security is on her way. I'll be meeting my predecessor along with the senior staff ASAP," Ahsoka said. "Right away, ma'am." The LARTs banked left and began their descent. They left a large canyon made by 2 rows of space scrapers and flew above a small boundary of much smaller buildings that marked the edge between a residential district and a nearby industrial zone. Their target was near that border, a 50-story tall domed building which was just the tip of that particular asteroid, Our codes check. We got confirmation and landing instruction. The former chief of security will gather the senior staff and await you in one of the conference room. Security will be ready to escort you there. The pilot informed her. Good. Boys, prepare for action. I want that building secured, especially the Ascension Wing. If the local forces give you any problem, give them one warning, and if they don't listen or appear compromised, put them down, hard. Ahsoka ordered. RK equals. 25 minutes later, Ahsoka stormed into a large ellipsoid conference room. 2 armed-to-the-teeth squads followed inside and fanned out behind her. She gave a toothy grin to the gathered scientists, a clear sign of her sore mood for anyone familiar with her species. The place looked just as she would have imagined it would, clean, sterile even, impersonal and expensive. I'm Colonel Ahsoka Tano, the new Chief of Security. The Togruta introduced herself. She listed a number of projects whose leaders were to prepare a briefing on the progress and expected time of battlefield deployment of their work, which she would be reviewing later before reporting to Obi-Wan. Then she dismissed those, promised others she'll be in touch soon, and then only Dr. Solemn and the former Chief of Security, an older human male with pale, almost transparent skin, remained. Tano fixed the director of the facility and bared her teeth at him in what could be charitably described as a death's grin. Dr. Solemn, can you please explain to me what do you think you're doing experimenting on Force-sensitive people and one of your colleagues, a certain Dr. Zash? To his credit, outwardly at least, the Durst kept his composure perfectly intact. He simply blinked with his large eyes in what was a clear demonstration of confusion. I'm afraid I have no idea what you're on about, young lady. Unfortunately for him, Ahsoka didn't have to rely on her sight alone. Ever since she arrived, she had been examining everything through the Force too. She could feel his shock and fear at her question. Got you, she thought. His predecessor felt a bit uncomfortable too. She nodded towards the human, and a pair of her men stunned him and went to secure him. That's a bad boy, she chided. Zash. Red-haired woman, probably a nasty disposition, she's supposed to be a Sith Lord after all. Spill, Ahsoka demanded and used the Force to reinforce her words. Solemn did talk. With a gusto too, he couldn't wait to demonstrate his genius by describing in an excruciating detail what he had done to date, what he planned to do to Zash and any alive Jedi he could get his hands on, and how he desecrated the corpses of multiple Jedi recovered from the temple he managed to somehow arrange to end into his custody. Halfway through Solemn's confession, which was being recorded by the helmet cameras of everyone present, Ahsoka wanted only one thing: to jump on the table, run up to the murderous bastard and strangle him with her bare hands. She had seen some ugly things during the war so far. Worlds burning, families torn apart, people dying from disease, thirst and hunger when logistics networks were disrupted by the fighting, not to mention those directly caught in the fighting. But this unthinking horror Solemn was busy describing to her. He's mine, girl. A voice broking no argument interrupting the monologuing madman. A glowing figure materialized in front of Ahsoka just when her self-control was about to snap. An older human woman wearing expensive robes with practical cuts stood proudly before Tano's eyes. She could feel the Force radiating from her, and it wasn't the soothing warmth she was accustomed to. Ice and burning anger combined within the stranger to become something she hadn't really experienced coming from the Force. Thanks to Delkatar, she had brushed with the dark side, but this was different. Enticing. Ahsoka wasn't the only one who could see Zash. Her men leveled their blasters at her, and Solemn finally shut up and took a fearful step back. The woman glanced at the Durst, gave him an impressive sneer that made him back off until his back struck the wall, then she turned back to look at Ahsoka and smiled. Aren't you an interesting little thing? Zash leaned forward to look at her more closely. Such righteous anger and indignation. A lot of power too. I can work with this. The Sith nodded to herself. Nice to make you an acquaintance, my new apprentice. The older woman beamed as Ahsoka. What? Tano spluttered. Your first master proved himself an idiot. Your second one is too busy running a galaxy-wide war. You are an unpolished gem, my dear, and I hadn't had a proper apprentice after Delcatar. You're it. Zash explained blithely. The things I can teach you. The Sith spoke in a voice that held all kinds of promises that made Ahsoka shiver in both fear and anticipation. This was so not what she signed up for. There was no way she would let a Sith Lord train her. Unless it was Delcatar, but he was different, right? Besides, he was married, so she shouldn't fear for her virtue with him, which... She glanced at Zash, who looked at her with smoky eyes. Yeah, that was certainly a concern here. Nope. No. Just no, this wasn't happening. Get Solemn into custody. Ahsoka growled, turned around and left the conference room without sparing a second glance to the ghostly form of the Sith. I do like them feisty. Zash crooned and suddenly was walking beside her. RK equals a half hour of pestering, sexual and other innuendos. Ahsoka was close to the end of her rope and that bloody ghost knew it. They just got into the Project Ascension wing and the part where Zash's body was held. It held a closer resemblance to cooked meat than a human body. One arm and legs were missing too, with the others having their flesh burned to the bone in places. How in the name of the Force aren't you dead yet? Ahsoka snapped at the Zash. I'm a Sith, dear. The ghost explained in a motherly tone. That. Ahsoka looked between the corpse that refused to die and the glowing form of the woman pestering her. That was actually a good point. Zash was simply too annoying to die, that had to be it. Ahsoka opened her mouth to retort, when the Force screamed. Her eyes snapped towards a spot on the floor, which was the closest she could pinpoint the direction. Oh, my. I haven't felt something like this in ages. Zash muttered. Her bearing shifted and became deadly serious. Something pushed Delcatar beyond his limits. Ahsoka did feel Kamino die along with everyone who had a strong connection with the Force. This was so much worse. She fell to her knees and screamed right along with the billions who she felt being consumed. She experienced their pain and horror, she felt the hunger of the dark side, her thirst for more. Warm, strong hands enveloped her into a warm embrace and a soothing voice whispered something in her ears. However, all she could hear was howls of pain as life itself unraveled. She could see them, she could feel them, billions upon billions of Bothans and other people from all across the galaxy as they died. It was wrong. Oh, so wrong, yet. There was a part of her that experienced an echo of what Vale was doing, of his emotions. Pain. Ahsoka felt her body ignite and burn. She relished in consuming a whole world. She screamed, begged, laughed and screamed again, all the while a Sith Lord did her best to soothe her anguish. Ahsoka spent an eternity in hell until the spell broke and she collapsed. Apprentice, what did you do this time? Zash asked aloud. Through their connection she felt the same thing the little Togruta did, which was surprising. The child wasn't Delcatar's apprentice, she knew that for a fact. Yet, there was a tiny, frayed link between the two of them and that might have just driven the young girl insane. Zash closed her eyes. What Vale did. It tasted like Vitate's ritual, however it hadn't worked. The hell happened out there on the rim to force him to such a desperate measures? The only bright side was that trough their connection, Zash was able to siphon a tiny fraction of the power that Delcatar consumed and his body simply couldn't handle. That had been enough to make her ghostly form more than tangible. She was practically bursting with energy. Zash sighed and put down the girl she had been cradling. Hopefully the child hadn't gone too insane, it would be such a waste if she did. The Sith Lord went up to the Bacta tank containing her current body and placed her transparent fingers upon the thick transparent alloy. She channeled the energy she stole into her own ravaged flesh and the Bacta around it, accelerating its regeneration to impossible levels. Before her eyes the burns healed, flesh knit together and began to slowly crawl up exposed bones. Part 6 RK equals Mandalorian positions, Sundari, Mandalore. Omega Squad gathered together for the first time in weeks. They met into a half-demolished trench just behind the current front line, which soon would be said front line. For 10 days the separatists pushed into the city with a suicidal Obadone, and it wasn't until a few hours ago that Nina was told the why of it. Thanks to underground hardlines, all communications from the Mandalorian government to the galaxy at large were directed through the capital, giving the impression that Sundari held a prize worth taking. An organic commander might have seen through the deception or not cared. The droid in charge of taking Mandalore, on the other hand, that clanker apparently had its directives and kept throwing forces at the death trap of a city. That suited the Mandalorians just well. Every additional day they spent fighting here meant better protection for the planetary shield generators. Those were built under a massive mountain, had dedicated theater shields and a lot of well-hidden fortifications protecting them, fortifications that were being expanded for months now. That was the good news. We aren't getting any more supplies. Dev's succinct words said it all. We're already down to using hydrogen for ammunition, Phi snapped. While all kinds of gas could be made into ammo for blasters, most of those simply lacked the punch or energy density to be a good substitute for the real stuff. That became really apparent in heavy and precision weaponry, like snipers. We're down to 10% of the critical reserve on explosives across the board, at least that's what all the quartermasters claim. Dev added. Boys, why don't we just go out to get ourselves some supplies? Arya asked. All commandos stopped whatever they were doing, either maintenance of their gear or taking bite to eat, and stared at the extremely dangerous mascot they kinda picked up when they arrived on Mandalore. At least that was the official version, and they all would swear it was the honest truth. What? The Chiss woman narrowed her red eyes at the clones. The clankers don't have any supply issues. They've got to have something we can use. There are a lot of them. Nina patiently explained. While the kid did soak up military knowledge like a sponge, there were moments when she demonstrated she hadn't received any real formal training. We won't be able to get away with any useful amount of supplies, especially blaster ammo. That tends to be quite bulky and heavy. At least the useful containers were, those with high-pressure gas used to recharge ammo packs. We don't go by ourselves then, duh. Arya rolled her eyes. We locate a supply depot, hit it hard to secure it and hold the perimeter while a bunch of those tall-strapping Mandalorian lads make it out like thieves with everything we can use. Arya, what part of, there are a whole shit pot of clankers ready to jump us, didn't you understand? Atin asked. Like that has stopped us before. The Chiss snorted at the very idea. You aren't going to drop this, are you? Nina groaned. Nope. No way in hell. I'm going to regret this. The commander sighed. I'll make a call to command and suggest we go liberate us some supplies. Arcade equals. Sysfob. Sundari's outskirts. Mandalore. This was the worst idea ever. Kor screamed. You think? Atin snapped. Medic. A Mandalorian medic did try to get to the wounded commando and got evaporated for his trouble. The separatist tank that did the deed rotated its turret and aimed at the bunch of debris where Kor and Atin huddled. A missile streaked down from the 5th floor of one of the nearby skyscrapers and it would have been a solid kill, if it connected. An APS-active protection system shredded it. Over the past week, the separatists began deploying vehicles with all types of new equipment added on, and this was among the nastiest for Sundari's defenders. Once they ran out of Tabana gas, the only reliable way to take out enemy vehicles were either IDS or missiles. It was bad enough that they were running out of dedicated anti-armor weapons, however the APS made a bad situation simply untenable. That was the reason why Command agreed on the raid in the first place. Without proper ammunition, Sundari was as good as lost. The separatists either paid attention for once or the defenders got unlucky. The why didn't really matter in the end. It was the fresh Confederate armor division that hit the perimeter moments after looting the fob began that mattered. Another missile flew at the tank, not fast enough to exploit the short recharge rate of the APS and got splashed too. Atin tried to drag his brother away, though he knew it was a futile gesture. They barely made it a few steps from their flimsy cover when the tank's cannon roared again and a plasma bolt detonated between the clones. It threw what little was left from their broken corpses in all direction. Only then 2 more missiles, the last the Mandalorians in that sector had left, flew at the tank. The APS blew the first out of the sky, however the second finally hit and its warhead sliced through the turret ring. Unsecured ammunition cooked up and the tank's cupola was blown right out of the chassis. When Arya saw and more importantly, felt, 2 of her friends die because of her idea, red haze engulfed her mind. She screamed incoherently and charged the advancing separatist armor. Even if she had heard Nina's shouts over the dark side's promises of vengeance, Astra wouldn't have cared. The Clankers, the Confederacy, they were all going to pay. The rage gave her speed and power that took the separatist forces by surprise. It was just enough of an edge that she managed to close with them without getting hit, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. Arya managed to slice, crush and fry her way through an armored platoon with infantry support, yet that success betrayed here. She suddenly found herself at an intersection with Confederate forces bearing on her from 3 directions. The Chiss had a moment to comprehend her mistake as the enemy aimed at her, and then hundreds of blaster bolts flew at her. Arya did all she could do, which wasn't much. She braced herself and channeled as much of the force in a shield around herself. It was going to last mere moments and then the enemy fire was going to incinerate her. She screamed at the unfairness of it all, at the force for allowing her friends to die and at the dark side for deceiving and leading her to her death. She screamed at herself at how foolish she was. And the force screamed right back with the voices of a million damned souls. Astra's shield fizzled under the onslaught, the dark side cackled madly and her connection with her master got slammed wide open by a flood of raw, corrupted power. The apprentice screamed again, loud and long enough to tear her vocal cords. Power, more power than any single being had any right to wield, erupted from her body in an uncontrolled pulse of energy. Blaster bolts, cannon shots and even missiles simply disintegrated before they could touch her body. Let us burn together. Forever. Arya unknowingly voiced her master's final words and the dark side obeyed. The energy she channeled twisted even further. The icy touch of the dark side became the heart of the star, mirroring the fury and pain both Vale and Astra felt. Black flames surrounded her body and exploded outwards, consuming everything in their path. Droids, vehicles, people, buildings, it didn't matter. While Bothawui died, Arya lit a fitting funeral pyre in the heart of the Mandalorian homeworld. Nina's eyes widened when he saw the approaching wall of fire. "Run, fools!" he screamed and followed his own advice. Clones and Mandalorians alike died as they ran and got fired upon by the separatists. He felt the incredible heat approaching and made peace with his death when a Mandalorian flying with a rocket pack swooped down and grabbed him. Nina saw another one of the maniacs grab Dev. Phi, who had his own jetpack for easier access to vantage point, hopefully did the smart thing and booked it already. The commander looked over his shoulder and blanched. Whatever Arya unleashed in her grief looked like a fusion explosion caught on a slow-motion camera. The black flames somehow both melted stuff and turned it into ash, leaving pure devastation in their wake. Despite their roar and the screams of the poor bastard who got caught in them, he could still hear Arya's howls of pain. Nina didn't doubt that the whole bloody city heard her. It was the most wretched, grief-stricken and agonizing sound he had ever heard. RK equals. An hour later, a third of Sundari was simply gone, along with a large number of enemy forces and many of the soldiers who took part of the raid. The separatists obviously had no idea what the hell happened and were busy pulling back and consolidating their positions. That, combined with the chaos among the Mandalorians, allowed Nina and the survivors of Omega Squad to get their hands on jetpacks and go check the epicenter of the cataclysm. They all knew that by all means Arya should have died. They heard her death, or so they thought. They went anyway. They found her too, at the bottom of a 100 meters deep crater made of black glass. Arya looked intact, at least physically. Whatever happened had destroyed her armor and clothes, leaving her naked, covered only by a fine sheet of dust. "What the hell happened, boss?" Phi whispered, afraid that speaking any louder might awake her, and then it was anyone's guess what would happen. "No idea, brother. No bloody idea," Nina whispered back. "Is it safe to move her?" Dev asked. "It doesn't matter. We can't leave her here for the clankers," Nina said. "Is it safe for us, I mean?" Dev looked pointedly at the devastation that surrounded them. RK equals Part 7 RK equals Gar HQ Coruscant. The Republic is dead. Its ashes are now ruled by the same traitors who allow the Sith slaughter billions. That was Parian from the ORR. We all saw the moons of Sullust burn. We saw Bothoi die. Ryloth Risa was on the air decrying the Republic. The Sith's obsession with death must end. All they do is spread misery and pain. We will end them. The Sith will never harm another person again. And this was the tune of many loyal news agencies across Republic space. Obi-Wan waved a hand and muted the holonet news. He turned around and looked at an image projected above the only furniture in the small room, a holotank built in the floor. The east part of the galaxy hung in front of him, colored blue, green, yellow and angry red. Across hundreds of sectors the war was stalemated. Both sides fed whole fleets and armies to keep it that way, and every day they lost and gained dozens of systems. The death toll mounted, yet strategically nothing changed. The West was unknown. Vale didn't deign to explain what happened with his mid-rim alliance. Did they win stunning victories securing that part of the galaxy and thus allowing him to reach Bothoi? Or was the fleet he brought here the only remaining Republic force outside the core and the East? The core fleets, old and new, were mobilized and training for a strike at Corellia. Raiding forces preyed on shipping and skirmished for intelligence, and then there was Kuat. Kuat, the reason why the war in the core was at a stalemate. The Quati were still reluctant to unleash their fleets. The Separatists were afraid to strike that most vital of systems. Both sides knew that the Confederacy could actually cripple the industry there. However, they would suffer punishing losses in return, and it would be for nothing unless they took out the Quati fleet, and if they committed enough ships to do so, even a victory would leave Fondor open for a devastating Republic counterstrike. One that would be successful and leave both sides back at the starting point. Kenobi scowled. If Kuat had unleashed their fleets, they could have kept Corellia, possibly taken out Fondor, and the war could have been decided. However, politics happened. Corellia was crippled, 4 of the 5 brothers were in Separatist hands. The Republic wasn't much better, and now, Kuat was the biggest power in the core. Anara Kuat and her wretched family let the Republic burn for power, and Obi-Wan was forced to play nice with her or doom the rest of the core. That was the truth of the matter, a truth he carefully avoided admitting to himself even if he knew it for months. The Republic was its greatest enemy, and this war pulled away the veil hiding that ugly truth. Was it pride that blinded him along with the other Jedi? Or perhaps their self-righteousness, the belief that they knew best? Obi-Wan felt the Force tear itself apart. He felt Vale's death as he murdered Bothoi. And the last chance for the Republic to somehow survive this conflict. It was a monstrous act. Just another atrocity committed by that Sith. Kenobi should have expected something like it after Sullust. What he didn't expect was for Del-Qatar to sacrifice himself to save his fleet in order to give it a chance to get to Mandalore. Their home. Obi-Wan didn't know what to think about that. As a Jedi, as what was still hopefully a decent human being, he knew what he should feel: horror at the war crime and relief that the monster was dead. It should have been that simple. It was anything but, because ever since Mandalore, Obi-Wan didn't really fight for the galaxy at large, no matter what soothing lies he kept telling himself. He didn't fight to uphold the Jedi ways. He fought for Satine. To keep her safe and happy. To protect her people, their people. Obi-Wan laughed bitterly. It was only now, when the dead Republic was falling apart at the seams, when a Sith made the unlikely choice to sacrifice himself for others, that he understood. The dark side was more insidious than he dared fear. Kenobi shouldn't have been able to understand why Vale did what he did at Bothoi. He shouldn't have been ever able to even contemplate doing something similar. It was unthinkable. Obi-Wan believed that he could never go to the same lengths. Yet he could imagine it. There. It was at that moment he knew why the Jedi forbade attachments. They could be wonderful. An incredible pillar of strength, the guiding light that could keep you going when the night was darkest. However, attachments, love, they could push you into the unthinkable. For the best of reasons. Kenobi glared at Kuat's symbol on the galactic map. Petty people, petty grievances and their lust for power. They killed the Republic and now it was his wife who would have to shoulder the blame and pick up the pieces. It was Satine who everyone would blame, loathe and go after. What would he do to protect her and their unborn daughter? What wouldn't he do? Obi-Wan finally understood Delcatar and hated him for that understanding. In the end, it was such an easy thing, betraying everything the Jedi stood for. Everything he used to stand for. Obi-Wan could see a path forward. A chance to keep the sham of the Republic going for a bit longer so he could save Mandalore, for his wife's sake if nothing else. All he had to do. Kenobi stood straighter as the weight of doubt slid from his shoulders. He chose his path and while he had many regrets, loving Satine would never be one of them, the same was true for his daughter. His thoughts manipulated the holotank and the image of the galaxy vanished to be soon replaced by that of a medical room. He saw Zash sitting upon an examination leg. Her left hand was gone just above the elbow and her right leg below the knee. Despite that she had it crossed so it served for a pillow for Ahsoka who still slept after suffering a backslash from Vail's suicide. The only thing the Sith wore was a thin green scrub that barely protected her modesty to the consternation of Tano's soldiers who watched her like birds of prey. Kenobi. Zash looked at the floating drone, probably the same one he used to see them both after Ahsoka got overwhelmed by a surge through her force bond with Vail, and Obi-Wan very much wanted to know how that thing formed in the first place. "I'm in need of your services," Obi-Wan admitted. "Oh? Wouldn't your wife object or perhaps you want us both at the same time? Or perhaps the three of us?" She sensually caressed one of Ahsoka's Leku as she said that. That woman was going to be the death of him. "I need you to be the big bad Dark Lord of the Sith." Obi-Wan forged ahead, ignoring Zash's innuendos. He refused to let her get under his skin, nor figuratively neither literally. "I need you to be as the one who taught Vail everything he knew and could do it better." He paused, thought about it and continued. "Or worse if you so desire." Zash stared at him for a long moment then laughed merrily. "Oh, Obi-Wan, you I like. You want me to threaten your wavering allies to keep them in line and terrify your enemies. Finally, you act as the supreme commander of a galactic power. I knew there was a reason why Delcatar liked you. I'll do what I must."